Okay, I guess I'm gonna jump on the bandwagon here and talk about The Last of Us and video game adaptations into... In this case, I guess TV, I don't know, there's not really many... are there really many examples? There was that recent Resident Evil show on Netflix, but I'm not gonna use that one because that's just like using it in name only, not actually in terms of characters or plot or anything to my knowledge. Whereas something like The Last of Us is as straight an adaptation as you can get. And as much as everyone is praising, well, I'd say 99% of people are praising it. I've seen like one or two people who don't like it. One of them being a friend of mine, which I find hilarious. His excuse is, oh, just either play the game or watch, a Let's Play. You get the exact same experience. And I'm like, that's the only, I'd argue, detriment of the show, which isn't even really a bad thing, is that the show, in this case, because I guess in this video I want to compare a good version of a video game adaptation with a bad version of a video game adaptation. The bad version being Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, because they're both aiming to do the exact same thing. They've taken a video game that happens to have a cinematic property, in this case, cinematics, it's they're games that usually have fully rendered characters, sometimes whether they've actually filmed those people in mocap and then added them to the game, or they've just animated them from the get-go, which I guess is a harder feat, probably would be. So, I don't know about the production of either of these shows, or either of, well, it's not a show, Welcome to Raccoon City was a film, but I don't know the production of the games, like in terms of how they were made, especially because for Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, God, that is a fucking mouthful. Can I just go Raccoon City? I don't know. It's an adaptation of two of the games, but they're the remakes of the games. So not exactly reboots of the games, but remakes where instead of the games being, kind of third-person top-down shooters in a way, it's not really top-down, is it? It's like obscure angles. It's updated it with modern graphics and modern cinematics, which plays out quite well in the game and makes it more, I guess, adventurous. I don't know, it depends on your quality of playing a video game. Like, I like BioShock, and that doesn't really have cinematics, like, vaguely, but not really. So, my only quarrel with something like The Last of Us, which, again, is not even a flaw of the show, is just a delineation of intent. In this case, is it a creative endeavour to make a show like The Last of Us, where the first episode, which so far is the only thing that has come out, is almost exactly a shot-for-shot, or basically a complete remake of the first hour to hour and a half of the game, narrative-wise. And I say that not in terms of, oh, you're walking around from point A to point B and they're talking about stuff. I mean, like, cinematically. Because The Last of Us is known as a cinematic game. It has a lot of cutscenes. I don't think it's got a huge amount of a lot because I haven't played the game. And I will note that I haven't played any of these games. I only say that because I don't play games that much. I do watch people play them. Which is where the irony of this comes in, because it's like, I'd rather watch the movie or the TV show adaptation over watching a Let's Play. Not really. I just, in this case for The Last of Us, given it's been getting good praise, I'm actually interested because I like the co-creator, in this case, Craig Mazin. Is it Mazin or Mazin? I just pronounced it as Mazin, yeah, because he did Chernobyl, and that's like, hey, you did this like really cool HBO show, miniseries thing that was very, realistic and accurate to the actual events that happened. Combinations of characters combined into some, outside of that, mostly accurate. What dream project do you want to do? What's that? You want to do The Last of Us? Alright, work with the guy who co-created the game and or co-directed the game, and just go have some fun. Now, again, in terms of spot-on accuracy, I've seen a lot of videos comparing the show to the game, and just all the delineations from scenes. Now, not every single thing is like shot-for-shot accurate, which I think kind of works because to some degree you need the show to have its own visual language, whereas the game is trying to do a cinematic language. It's doing a cinematic language for its cutscenes, which is fair. It's what I wanted to do. It's fair enough. It's not always fun to just have people just, are you going to play as Joel sitting down on the goddamn couch while Ellie walks around the room? Or is the scene going to be you're Ellie and you're watching Joel just there on a couch, and maybe you're over in the corner looking through books and stuff, and she casually mentions that his watch is broken. It's like, yeah, it's going to be a cutscene kind of thing. Something that's very specific to a character trait is going to be emphasized in a cutscene, which is usually the reason for having cutscenes. You emphasize a story thing, a character thing, even though that's usually still a story thing, because in this case it's continuing his story from the prologue with his daughter to now, and what has become of him, what he's had to deal with, and just like how he deals with the grief to some degree. The game knows where it wants to choose its cinematic points. Here's a really tense sequence that you can't have any control over, despite the fact that it's a video game. The inherent nature of a video game is you control the characters. But sometimes the game needs to have a story, and you have to be willing to accept that the game will take over and show you a story play out, and you have to deal with it. Maybe it's quick time cutscenes, but for the most time, it's just a cutscene. And I don't know, I guess people have quarrels with that. People don't like that occasionally. If it's a big major character choice, it's going to be maybe reserved for a cutscene so you can play as the character and get used to them, experience the world with them, fall in love with them, and then see their story also unfold kind of on the side, but in these cutscenes. And it's an interesting technique in terms of storytelling. Where the TV show differs is that you have no control. You're watching people do things. It, to me, felt like a long cutscene because, well, that's what it is. But that's where, of course, the creative vision of the, writer-director is like, hey, even I'd say like the cinematographer, the editor, how multiple people have put this together and structured their scenes and their sequences. Do they want to make a scene that's a direct homage to the original game where you're driving through these locations in these streets and you see the world around you going crazy, and all you can do, maybe if you're in the game, all you can do is look out the windows, you look up, oh my god, there's a plane, you look to the side, people are coming out of a building because they're infected, all this kind of stuff. And then maybe it turns into more of a cinematic part where it cuts the character to a point of view where they turn around. In this case, I'm referencing the part where they're driving down the road, the girl turns around and sees the plane that's about to crash. Something like that I could imagine being a cinematic in the game where it can jump between. So you have control as a character, but for the really pivotal points that are going to change the pretense of the scene, they want to do that extra step. I don't know if they did that in the game. I have no idea. Doesn't matter? Not really to my point. I mean, I know you could easily be like, well, what's the point of listening to you if you haven't played the game, if you haven't experienced the game? Well, that's where I want to come into this show, because I, like a lot of people, have not played the game. And a lot of the people who are watching the show are going to be watching the show based on, hey, I really like Pedro Pascal, or, god damn it, the girl's name who's playing Ellie, I can never remember. Her character sounds like a goddamn character name from Game of Thrones, but she isn't. But maybe you're interested in the cast. Great. Maybe you're interested, like me, I like Craig Mazin, so I'm curious to see what he makes. I also do like the cast. And I like the concept because I do know it's based on the game. Maybe you've got a specific reason for why you want to watch it. In this case as well, for me, it's like, I don't want to watch a Let's Play. I'm not against it, but I don't want to. I prefer to sit down week by week watching a TV show adaptation. Let's see how it goes out, If I wanted to watch a Let's Play of a Resident Evil game, well, I'd do that now, wouldn't I? And I have, because none of the movies are like the games. And I guess that's where we should probably talk about Welcome to Raccoon City, because unfortunately I have watched that film, and there is a special feature on the 4K. I bought the 4K, it was on sale, but I like the Resident Evil films with Mila Jovovich. I know they're not like the games. I enjoy them for completely different reasons, because I can suspend my disbelief of not being a huge fan of the games. Which is also why I'm kind of benefiting from, and not really benefiting, but kind of being confused by the show, because it's like, as in The Last of Us, because it's like, everyone praising it for being exactly accurate to the game in terms of its cinematics and also just in terms of narrative and everything, which I'm perfectly fine with. I mean, it kind of needs to tell that story to base it off of something. But is it going to be like Welcome to Raccoon City, which if you watch the special feature, you probably won't, because I don't think anyone really bought that film. And anyone who watched it didn't like it, which is fair. It's not a very good film. Its main issue is the fact that it's trying too hard to be the games. The games in their remakes, I think it's just the first and second game, because they're combining the narrative of those two games. Oh, you know the mansion game? Yeah, that's in this. Oh, you know the cops in the city? Yeah, that's also in this. We're combining the two together. There is not anything that really connects them, but we're going to force it, and it's not going to work. So, I mean, there's vague story beats that do combine, obviously. I mean, they end up having to go to the mansion anyway, but it's like, I don't know, I don't remember a lot of what happens in that film. It's very forgettable. But, like, there's a special feature that impressed me to some degree, because the feature itself shows how much of the movie is a shot-for-shot remake of the game. And now, though that could be a cool thing, because, hey, we already have these cinematics, let's just retranslate them. But, you know, make them in a movie. We're just gonna, it just feels like, for that movie, it felt like fans of the games, fan casting, and paying their friends, who are actors, to just do the roles. Even if their friends aren't huge fans of the games. I know one of them in particular, again in the featurette, was a fan of the games and was like, oh, it was so cool to see this and that in the background, like these Easter egg elements. And he's like, oh, the fans will love that because it's such good attention to detail. Yeah, I mean, props there, sure. But at the same time, where does the creativity come from? Where does it really resonate? Because if Raccoon City is a shot-for-shot remake of the game, which, when I was watching it, I'm like, the game has a different feel to it than the movie does. Because, and it might just be a directing thing, because the game it did feel more cinematic to some degree, but it felt scary. Even though the shots were identical to the movie did not feel as scary as the game did. And I'm not saying that in the point of view of, oh, if I was playing the game, I'd be much more scared by the cinematic. I'm taking this as someone who's never fucking played the games and is looking at the two as a side-by-side comparison and literally thinking, oh my god, not just have they recreated the game cinematically into the movie, they've made it worse. Because there's a cheaper quality to it. Again, it might just be a directing thing. It's one of those things of like, there's a missing link. That despite everything here being exactly the same, you've got someone cast as the character, they're going through the same beats, you've got the exact same shots, the exact same cutaways, the exact same sound effects, all this kind of stuff literally just translated. I'm literally saying it's translated into a scene from a movie, and it just doesn't have the right feel. And that could just be on the problem of the director, which I would probably blame, because can you blame the writing when the writing is literally what you're seeing from the game? There is some bad writing in the movie though, because again, they're combining two different games. The two games by themselves are contained, and you can feel that tension contained, which is why it's scarier, I'd assume. I mean, I'd imagine anyway, oh, if you're stuck in a mansion the whole time, you'd be scared because you're in a mansion the whole time. Oh no, let's cut away to a police station. You know, it doesn't always work. You know, there's a level of tension, but if you're going to cut away to other characters like 20 kilometers away in the town down the hill, then it's like, I mean, someone of these two groups is going to save the other, I'd assume. I don't know, there's just a lot less tension because of this. And that is the main reason why I think The Last of Us differs so much, and to a good degree, because its directing actually it feels like it has intent as a show, not just as a recreation of these other cinematics, not just a recreation of everything else, from story beats to character beats and everything, because one could make the argument of, oh, the game did it so well that of course the show is going to recreate it. But there needs to be a specific intent that's actually showcased in the show, that you can watch the show by itself without having any knowledge of the game or what happens in the game and still feel the same emotions. And that's what I think they pull off a lot better in The Last of Us, because I've never played the game. I know some of the story elements. I know that question A person dies. I know what the twist is with this character. I know some things like that because, of course, the games are immensely popular. They've been memed about, discussed about, all that kind of stuff. I've given up on the element of people spoiling video games because I don't put in the time and the effort to play video games anymore. I've lost that interest, which I hate because I love video games, but I just don't like playing them, especially horror games as a whole. Like, I will happily watch people play video games, but I cannot play them. It's too much for me. For example, I played Alien Isolation. I love that game. I couldn't get past like the first 2 levels because I'm just too scared. I prefer watching people play it, and I've watched 3 different YouTubers play the game several times over because I love that game and I like their reactions to it. One of them in particular is now a banned YouTuber, which really sucks because I really liked his Let's Plays, at least of those Alien Isolation games. Nevertheless, I mean, I can always go back to Markiplier, we all can. Nevertheless, with The Last of Us, it's like, sure, I could watch a Let's Play, I could watch a summation of the cutscenes. Realistically, I'd want to go with a Let's Play because, though there are some cutscene channels online, that's like, there's specifically one on YouTube that actually not just cuts out the cutscenes and publishes them on YouTube, but also cuts out key dialogue parts and like character parts in the actual gameplay as well, so you can still understand the story as it progresses. It's not just cutscene to cutscene, it's cutscene, dialogue and character, motivations and stuff that's developing as you're playing the game, and then back to the cutscene, and I like that element. Now, of course, there is the complete opposite of both of these two things, where the Raccoon City tried to do an exact remake of the games and failed because it just didn't have the directing vision. And I say that because even despite the fact that in the featurette, the director says how much of a fan of the games he is. And it's like, just because you're carbon copying something doesn't mean it's going to feel like the original did. It just feels like a carbon copy without any thought or emotion going into it outside of, I want that, do it again. And that's it. It's weird. It's a really weird design choice. The Last of Us seems to, so far, at least from the pilot, achieves it. And to a good degree that I am interested in this story. I'm interested in these characters. But also because it's a story where, one of the main characters, well, I'd just say the main character in this case for Pedro Pascal's character, Joel, goes through a really traumatic event at the start of this terrifying experience, and then you're connected to his character for the rest of the time, even though you don't witness this from his character's point of view for the first half of the episode, just like in the game, you follow from the daughter. It's a really interesting narrative choice. And the fact that they still went with that, they still focused on that, it's like, hey, this worked really well here, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to make it convincing. We gotta still direct the fucking shit out of this, It's not just, oh, look, Joel's guitar's in the background, how cool is that? What a great Easter egg. It's like, no, in this case, I wouldn't even pin these as Easter eggs. It's simply just a straight adaptation. You're watching what's already been done before in a video game format, now being done in a movie format or TV format. Of course, the main failure of both of these is that they're not Halo, because Halo had such a great show. Did you see the fight scene at the end where it just randomly cuts to first person? The Last of Us seems to be, at least from the pilot, a good adaptation. Welcome to Raccoon City, despite its accuracies to the game in terms of its cinematic level, it doesn't have any interest in terms of, characters. Actually, I think that's a really key point. The Last of Us actually writes its characters because I know the cinematics have character development and, we have fully fleshed out characters by the end of the game and whatever, so people making the show know what they're doing and know what they're basing it off of and whatever, even though, of course, one of the co-creators is the guy who did the game. With Welcome to Raccoon City, it's like, oh, what if we made Resident Evil 1 and 2 and just made it the cinematics shot for shot? How cool would that be? It's like, yeah, but what about the characters? Like, how do you make those characters interesting? Because they're not the most interesting characters, but they're also not interesting, because at the most time, they're interesting because you are them. You are playing as them, and that's usually what makes it more interesting. The experiences that they go through, the experiences that you go through as this character. It's it is third person for the most part, but you're still playing as this character. You're still experiencing this stuff with them. And you see their character develop even just minutely over the course of the games. You look at the movie, I don't think they know what character or even development is, because they just kind of exist there, shoot zombies, and move on. Like, that's genuinely it. I don't know what any of the... Like, outside of, oh, those two are siblings, those two are colleagues, he's a rookie. Like, they go for archetypes and stuff, like, as if there's no characterization in the games whatsoever. It's like, be like Sonic. Sonic games don't have much characterization. If I'm looking at the original, like, Sonic 1 or Sonic 2, they don't have too much characterization. Like, it's very basic stuff. Sonic's the hero character, he's a bit snarky, he defeats Eggman. Eggman's the bad guy, he's evil. I mean, it's pretty easy to do it, but then give it the role to Jim Carrey, he gives his own flair to it while still making it accurate, not accurate, but at least enough of a adaptation that you could buy it as, yeah, he feels like Eggman to some degree. Same as Sonic, he feels like Sonic to some degree. They still have their charm because they're being written as expanded characters, whereas the Resident Evil ones, they don't have expanded characters. In fact, they don't really have characters at all. It's a very unfortunate element for what happened to that movie, where it's like, it's made by fans, but that doesn't always mean that the fans know what the fuck they're doing. You know, they might be like, oh, this is so cool, we've just remade this whole sequence from the game. It's like, that's great, but what is he doing? What's his intent, you know? Is he going to change by the end of this movie? I don't know what's happening, in terms of as a character thing. Oh, she's dark and mysterious. Great, what's she like by the end of the movie? She hasn't changed? Oh no, why is that? Because she doesn't change in the games for 4 games? Because it's the same situation of rinse and repeat? Because it's more or less their experiences that's interesting, rather than the characters really changing? I'm like... But you need to change. I'm not saying that that's exactly what the Resident Evil games are like, but it's like, if that is what the Resident Evil games are like, then you can't have that in the video, in a movie, or in a TV show. You need to be able to adapt them and write for them and actually characterize them. Direct them to make them feel like characters. It's really hard to argue this for The Last of Us because, I mean, it's also just in good hands in general, but The Last of Us are really well-written games. So, no matter what people might say about the second game, at least from what I know, the second game is still really good in terms of writing and character. And it's just an interesting choice to see how people compare the game and the show. And the thing is, I want to watch the show over watching a Let's Play of the game because I'm much more of a TV movie person over a video game person. So that's what's compelling me to, outside of Twitter, won't shut the fuck up about it, it's what's compelling me to watch it. All the immense reviews saying it's exactly like the game is a minor concern for me, because I'm like, if it's exactly like the game, what's the point? Like, if it's a complete carbon copy of the game, what's the point of watching it? But I guess, the same thing would be if I wanted someone to do an adaptation of BioShock and it be exactly like the game. I'd want it to be exactly like the game because the game has a really good story. And I really like that story. I know it's not a lot of cutscenes, but, because it's mostly people talking over radios and stuff, very minor cutscenes when they do appear, but it's like, I'd want it to be not exactly shot for shot, because you can't really shot for shot exactly a third person kind of game, so that's where a lot of creative choices have to come in, especially because that's a first person game. That would be something completely different to actually, film. At least something like Half-Life, which again would be in the same vein. You'd want it to be very goddamn similar. You'd be able to do a third person thing for Gordon, but the only problem with Gordon is that he doesn't fucking talk. Same with Chell and Portal. So, the main character doesn't talk in BioShock, but it's not exactly a bad thing, because it's still meant to be you as this person to some degree. So, yeah, I'm hopeful for this show as a show. Whether it's completely the exact same straight-laced adaptation from the game, but with its own, charm of it being a TV show, then that's cool. If the fans love it, that's great. If regular folk who didn't even know, my boss started watching it yesterday, She didn't even know it was from a video game until I told her. And she's like, oh, well, I really liked the first episode. I'm hopeful to watch the rest. But she also likes to binge a whole show. She doesn't like watching week by week because, I don't know, binge culture has made people really anxious about what's happening next week. I love when that shit happens. When that happened for Better Call Saul, holy hell was that fun. So, yeah. It'll be interesting to see what they do. And I might even just watch the whole first season for the next 9 weeks. And then once it's done, I might watch if it actually does the whole game, the whole first game, I might then watch a Let's Play of the whole first game and get in those extra character details and understand this and that, or subplots that they cut out of the game, out of the show, because maybe they had to focus it more and they had to cut things out. Like, I feel like they're going to get to that point where they might have to do that, but I don't know. That's why I'm really curious to see what they do, like, because it's clearly everyone's loving it. Well, at least the fans are loving it because of how much like the game it is, how identical to the game it is. But can being identical go too far? Does it lack creative vision because it's identical? In this case, I'd say no. Because we have Raccoon City as a perfect counter-example, I definitely say that this is already starting to be a... Sure, you could make the argument of, what's the point I could play the game? Or what's the point I could watch cutscenes? Well, then do that, you know? Stop arguing and just fucking do it. If you want to watch the cutscenes, watch the cutscenes. If you want to watch a Let's Play, watch a Let's Play. I want to watch a TV show. It just happens to be a complete straight adaptation of a video game that happens to be very cinematic. Sue me. You know, most people want to do that. All the fans are wanting to be exactly like the game because they want to relive that. They want to see that again. And they're loving it so far. So, hey, that's good, you know? It'll be interesting. I think if Raccoon City was a TV show, arguably, and they made that as an adaptation, maybe it could have worked better, but I think at the same time with a Resident Evil thing, it's like, you need to kind of change principles of how characters work, because those games aren't run on character, they're run on the experience. The Last of Us, though it is an experience to go through it, that's because it's a continuing story. It's a developing story. That's what makes it so interesting and riveting. Because it's well written, it's well directed, the characters are interesting, the world is interesting, and you get to play in it, and it's amazing of an experience. Whereas Resident Evil just isn't that. I mean, in terms of like the movie, I wouldn't say that the games aren't an experience, it's a fucking terrifying experience. Of course you'd want to experience that, that'd be cool as hell. But it's like, are you there to be like, yay, I want to see what happens this week with Jill Valentine. What's that? She's the exact same person that she was last week? Holy shit. You know, sometimes it is what it is. Let me actually just jump in here. I figured for the sake of this video, I might actually just, instead of... Maybe I'll watch the season, like when the season ends, see what the game's like, which I might still do. I took a watch of the first 15 minutes of the game, at least in terms of from a cinematic point of view. It got up to the part where the car crashes. There's enough delineation from the show already, from like obviously the opening prologue in the show isn't in the game, which I knew wasn't, but it also gave more of an idea as to what exactly the virus is and whatever. But then the show does the thing of actually expanding on the daughter's character and making it like a 2-day thing rather than it just being overnight of an experience, which is interesting because for the game it's like we want you to get into the story, get into the knuckles of it and get into it straight away. And I like that element of, as a game, that's what you want to do. It's still cinematic enough. I mentioned at one stage that, you know, they're driving in the car and you'd think that, well, as a game, you'd be looking around as a character while the other characters are talking because you can't control it because you're going from the daughter's point of view. And in this case, they do the same thing in the game, exactly what I expected that they would do, but it's different in the show because it's still from her point of view, but they just added to it. They've added the neighbours. They've added more depth into the neighbours at least. They've added more depth into here, changed parts of dialogue here and character behaviours there, but for the most part the gist of it is there. So I think it's less for me a fear of, oh no, it's not exactly... It's going to be like a carbon copy, why would I bother watching the show if I can play the game or watch someone play the game, which for me is still not as interesting as playing the game probably would be. And where in the game, instead of having all this detail shown to you over a period of time through visual exposition or from background things of police cars going by, or people casually mention, hey, there's a lot more police today. Is there anything on the news or whatever, like they do in the show? In the game, there's a newspaper, and you can look at it and read it, and you can go to the TV, and the TV's talking about something that's happening, and then the TV signal cuts off and you hear an explosion. You can look through the window and see the place exploding in the distance. And it gives you that kind of quality where you can basically choose to see what you want to see, whereas in the show, everything's more deliberate, but it's also more constructive, it's more additive. And just from the opening 15 minutes, it's already a lot more in depth just for the show. They knew, hey, this is what we've got for the show. We could make it the exact same, or we could expand upon it. We could grow the characters so you as an audience care about the characters, and then that also allows you to grow the tension. The scenes go longer in terms of their sequences. Them driving through, they go through different avenues because obviously they're basing off a real location. You kind of got to be more realistic to that degree, but also there's a part, I've just hit the part where they get hit by a car. That doesn't happen like it does in the show. They don't have to go around the bus, they're going down a street, and they narrowly avoid getting hit by a car, which I could assume is probably the showrunners being like, hey, this is like an Easter egg to the game, because that's like, oh, in the game, they get hit by that car. So it's given them a different experience, but they still get hit by an exploding airplane. Makes it more cinematic because it's a TV show instead of it being a cinematics of a game. Which could be just, ever in a game as a creative choice, hey, we want to make it more specific to this, or we want to make it really over the top and granular cinematic, but we don't have the budget. So I don't know if what the choices there was, but in this case, if we're looking at a creative choice, their limitations make it a lot more realistic, and just helps to make it go quicker, whilst also still being interesting, because you could lose interest within like that first 10 to 15 minutes. I don't see why you would, because it sounds interesting, and it's a lot different to what you'd expect for the game to be for how it starts, and then it just grows from there. But I also wanted to note as well, because I kept mentioning the Halo show, or at least I keep mentioning the Halo show, obviously not a great show, but that's one of those classic examples of it's a narrative game, despite being a first-person shooter, and you can clearly adapt that narrative of the first game of Combat Evolved into the show. Like, they could have done that for like a one-season thing of, you start when you're in the ship, and you crash on the ring, and on the Halo, and then you got to fight the Covenant, save people, build an army, go through this thing, deal with the Flood, lose your men, deal with the Sentinel, and then get betrayed by the Sentinel, and have to fight the robots and the Flood and the Covenant, and then blow up the Halo and get the hell off of it once you realise what it is and what it's built for. So that could have been a good first season of a show. They didn't do that, of course, but yeah, so just an interesting add-on I wanted to add, because yeah, I wanted some insightfulness on my part, because I was like curious. I'm like, I don't want to be rambling on about crap that I don't actually know about, which is also the point. I'm not trying to be like, I'm a genius who knows all about the game. Of course I'm going to know exactly what happens in the show. No, I want to know that there is a delineation. I want to know that there is a difference, and I've confirmed to myself that there's enough of a difference whilst having like a creative liberty that's not just shot-for-shot remakes like the Resident Evil game is, and to the Resident Evil movie, where it is shot-for-shot remakes with no creative thought put into meaning or anything. It's, the Resident Evil game is all for the cinematic value of the cinematic terror of, oh my god, look at what's happening, but the game is all about the atmosphere and the environment and the fear. Probably not all about, but from the general gist, because it's a horror game, whereas the movie just tries to replicate that without trying to actually make the characters interesting or, build an actual story. So, just because they're cramming two games together because the story is so thin and short, it's probably because they're only going based off of the cinematics of the game, realizing, oh, it's like 45 minutes each, let's just cram that together and not actually develop any of the characters. So my recommendation here is, don't watch Raccoon City. It's not good. It just feels dry, Lifeless. Lifeless is a good word, You know, it might be a carbon copy, but it has no life to it. At least The Last of Us, so far, has life. Which is probably bad for the characters in the show because of zombies and stuff. I don't know, pandemics are crap. Anyway, see you next time. I don't know, let me know if I should watch a gameplay of the game instead. Or a game that's a good adaptation. I don't fucking know, who cares? Bye.